Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. My name is Zane Hamilton, and as you can see today, I'm actually joined live with Greg. So at CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capability of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Aptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in a collaborative spirit of open source. So this week, we're actually going to have How Did I Get Involved in HPC? And we have a nice big crowd to join us. Bring everyone in. We'll start saying hello. There we go. So I'm going to start in the top middle. Rose, you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute, Rose.
I have to unmute myself.
There you are.
Okay, you know what? Slowly but surely, I'm learning the tricks of the trade here.
There we go.
Hey, you guys, I'm Rose Stein. I started with CIQ in October. I'm super excited to be here. And I guess that's it. I'm Rose.
Gary, welcome back.
Thank you. My name is Gary Jung. I manage the HPC, institutional HPC for Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and I also run the HPC program for UC Berkeley.
Looks like Gary's in a different place today.
Gary is in a different place today.
Yeah.
Gary, where are you? And what is the picture in the background?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm at my in-laws down in Southern California.
Are you having better weather than we are up in Reno, where we are still getting snow?
Oh, it was raining on the way down last night. It's not great.
Welcome, Gary. Forrest, good to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, Zane. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Good. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Forrest Burt. I'm an HPC systems engineer here at CIQ. I've worked for CIQ for a little under 2 years now, and before that, I worked as a sysadmin in kind of the HPC space in the academic national lab sphere. So happy to be on the webinar.
Thank you, Forrest. Mr. Anderson, you're in a different place too.
I am. This is my presumed new location, but we'll see how long it sticks. Yeah, so my name's Jonathan Anderson, and I've been an HPC systems person for a while now, in the academic and higher ed space mostly, and some national lab. But yeah, with CIQ, systems engineer, solutions architect, that kind of thing.
So hold on, Jonathan. Yeah. You're kind of known throughout the HPC ecosystem.
You know, I almost for this one. I introduced myself as an HPC mascot and just was going to leave it there, but yeah.
No, you got to tell the mascot story.
Well, you know,
you have to. Hold off, though. Let's wait. Let's get to Brian.
Okay.
We'll get everybody else going. Welcome, Brian.
Hey, everyone. Brian Finn here. I'm a solutions architect at CIQ. Backgrounds in HPC administration and architecture. I have a little bit of workflow experience in the genomics and automotive industries.
Thank you, Brian. John Grisnog, welcome back.
Hi, John Hanks, Grisnog. I am a HPC principal engineer, usually in life sciences, but I've dabbled in a little bit of everything HPC-ish over the years.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Dr. Godlove.
Hey, I'm Dave Godlove. I'm one of the many CIQ solutions architects here in the meeting today. My background is in primary science, biomedical sciences, and I've been an HPC off and on, I guess, for about 6 years or something like that.
Thank you, Dave. Dr. Sill, good to see you. Welcome.
Hey, Alan Sill, Managing Director for the High Performance Computing Center at Texas Tech University and a co-director of a multi-university industry university cooperative research center in cloud and autonomic computing, which we do a lot of work with data center automation and where I try to spend all my spare time not taken up by my day job.
Thank you, Alan. So let's go back to the middle. Let's go back to Jonathan and hear the actual mascot story. How did you get involved in this, Jonathan?
Well, I mean, that story is not quite the same as how I got involved in it, but maybe
you can tell both. That's fine.
So, I mean, I didn't know anything about HPC or what it was until kind of my first job out of college. But a guy that was a year or two ahead of me in school for his senior project, built a Beowulf cluster out of old IT equipment that he got from, the IT department. So they had a terrible, kind of the worst case scenario of a completely zero ventilation, closed closet with, baker's racks and 16, I think, Dell Optiplexes just jammed in there. And I just knew it existed. And he was always in that closet working on it. And kind of either before that or around that, he had also done an internship with the summer undergraduate laboratory internship program of DOE Sully. And he hated it. And for some reason, I thought that meant I should do it. And so I did the same internship at Argonne National Lab for a summer and worked on some of their academic clusters there and had a great time. And went back there for my first real job out of college. And so as part of that, so I was with the mathematics and computer science department there first, just doing the existing kind of institutional cluster stuff. But it's one of these memories that I don't understand in retrospect what happened, because I'm pretty sure I didn't have a job there, and I just drove up there and wandered onto campus and stayed until they gave me a job. I think this actually happened. But as part of that, they were hiring people for their new leadership computing facility where they were building a big IBM Blue Gene P system that was supposed to be a big, I was going to say first petaflop. That's not true. It was a half petaflop system. And at the time was the number 3 system in the world, which was kind of cool. But that meant there was press around it. And so now we'll get into the story that Greg wants me to tell. So there was press around it, and they were taking, glamour shots of the machine. And the photographers happened to be there on Veterans Day. And I, completely unrelated, was singing with a couple of guys in a choir there on campus and was dressed up for a Veterans Day, thing that we were doing. We were going to be singing later that day. But because I had a suit on and was, a crazy new hire who would do such a thing, the photographer pointed at me and suggested that I should stand next to the computer and use it while they took pictures. And so there's a picture of me with my hands inside the guts of a BGP rack that has become quite well distributed on the internet because someone, I've tried to figure out who did this, but someone put it as the first thumbnail on the supercomputer page on Wikipedia, which, because of the way Google works, means that when you Google supercomputer, you get this picture of me standing next to a Blue Gene. And that means that anyone who wants to do any PR about supercomputing it has a pretty strong likelihood of using this picture. Also, because it's completely open licensed, so you can use it for anything without any fees or whatever. So I first started getting notifications of this picture because an Illinois senator, I think, like a state senator, was using it in a political ad, and that was kind of interesting. But the pinnacle of it for me is that when IBM Watson was competing on Jeopardy, IBM used it in an interstitial about supercomputing and such. So I like to tell people that I was on Jeopardy as well.
So I've heard you tell the story about in the picture before, but did you know that Jonathan was a singer?
I'm not sure I should say.
I feel like this is something we should have known already.
It's not on my LinkedIn, so maybe that's why no one would know.
But you've also never told me that before, so I'm.
He's not just told you.
Okay.
He's told everybody in the world.
Wow.
Who's going to watch this? Everybody.
That's fantastic. I love it. So, Greg, because we're sitting in a different place ourselves, I'm going to let you go next, but where are we?
So we're at the CIQ office, and this is the first time using this for doing a webinar or podcast, but we actually have a pretty nice setup. What you can't see is, just like every kind of new sound area and whatnot, at the moment there are wires everywhere that are outside of the camera view, and it is not safe. Oh, there we go.
There it is.
There we go.
Look at that guy in the suit. It's awesome.
This is the best. Thank you, whoever found that and is viewing it right now.
It's not difficult to find.
This is
You should have gotten paid for this, man. You should have gotten paid.
Jonathan, I was going to say the same thing. I can't believe you didn't get royalties.
I think that they're not allowed to pay you for it when you're a government employee.
Did you sign off on sharing your likeness?
No, I don't think I did. But you know what? It's all worked out okay.
Don't see a lot of
I just
ties
wish
and
that the
data
clothes
centers
fit
anymore.
better.
Well, how long ago was the picture?
Oh man, that would have been like 2008, 2009, something like that.
Oh, see, I was going to say if it was the 80s, there's a video that the way the clothing fit is very similar to in the 80s. I think it was a Rick Astley video.
Maybe.
Could be.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm sorry to do this to you, Greg, but if it was in the 80s, I would be crawling next to the rack instead of standing next to it.
Well, also, did racks look like this in the 80s? Come on, Greg. Come on. You know that this is.
Oh man. Oh man, you all are harsh.
All right, so we're in Reno.
We're in Reno. We're in our office, the CIQ office. We have an audio room that we have now set up. We can do podcasts, we can do all sorts of cool stuff from here. But as I was saying, you can't see the ocean of wires that are on the other side of the camera because we haven't actually done any wire management yet. But on this side of the camera, it's pretty neat.
Nice.
We just need a sign or something behind us. It says something cool, maybe a neon sign.
And thank you for all the work behind that side of it too. Fantastic people putting this together. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Go for it. Yeah.
Where are the guitars? Sorry.
So yeah, to Alan's point, it'd be great if you guys would tell us your story. Throw those up in the comments and let's hear how you guys got started. But I kind of looked over at Greg. How did you get started in HPC?
It's a very short story. Not.
Say Greg with a short story.
Yeah, it doesn't happen. So I started off in biochemistry. I got my degree in biochemistry and my undergrad degree in biochemistry. And I decided I wanted to take a little break from school and I wanted to go work and do something different for a little bit because I spent my whole life up until that point in school. So I wanted to go do something different for a little while. Now it's funny. So around the university, somebody near graduation, as we were approaching graduation time, there was a bunch of signs that said, "New biotech startup looking for junior level scientists." Now, anyone who's ever worked in biotech or like a startup would not be looking for junior level scientists, but my wife saw this. And she wasn't my wife at the time, but she saw these flyers. She ran around the whole school and tore all of the flyers down and then gave me all of them. So I was the only one who's calling. So I started calling up this startup and the receptionist is like, "We are not looking for junior level scientists. So no, thank you for calling." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let me send you my resume anyway." And just, kind of like Jonathan, right? I wasn't physically hanging out there, but I started calling back like every week, like every single Friday. I would call back. "Oh, I got changed to my resume. Let me send you my new resume." And this lady was getting so tired of hearing from me. This went on for well over a month. She's getting tired of hearing from me. I'm getting nervous because here we are nearing graduation time, and I really wanted to find a cool place to work. And but she's getting tired of me, so she gave my contact information to the CEO, who responded to me and said, "Greg, thanks for reaching out. We're really not looking to hire a junior scientist. So, please, stop bugging us and whatnot." And I said, okay, well, thank you. I hung up and I was so excited because now I know the CEO's contact number and how to bug him. So weekly I would bug him, and to the point where he finally felt bad enough for me that I ended up with a job offer. But it wasn't to work at this new startup. He said, I'm creating another startup and I'd love for your help on that. You'd be the first employee." Okay, awesome. And so I joined this and I started. I literally converted his 5-car garage in Hillsboro into a genomics laboratory, a wet lab. I mean, it was awesome. Like, I'm laying tiles, I'm cleaning cobwebs and whatnot, and turned it into a sterile lab. And at some point, he's like, we need to do we need to do a bunch of genomic searches on the internet. And at the time, in the mid 90s, 96-ish, he's like, the only place you can do this is over the internet. The NCBI is hosting a bunch of genomic supercomputers, and they're running BLAST and other things, which wasn't even open source at the time. And he says, we can't give our novel sequences away over the internet for free, because somebody can get that novel sequence. So we need to figure out how to build systems on, in our lab, in the garage, and start doing this. And so this was my first introduction to Linux. And I thought he was pronouncing Unix weird, and because I never heard of it. And then he explained to me what it was. We had somebody come over and start doing some development, and we actually got genomic searches running on-prem as fast as the government supercomputers, using huge amounts of memory, clustering systems together and whatnot. And this is the first time I saw any of this. And I was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. All right. You can go download software off of our 56K, 28K modem, whatever it was at the time. I don't remember. Put it on a couple floppy disks and go install it on a DEC Alpha, just to kind of put the timing on, right? With 0.5 gigabyte of memory, which cost well over $10,000 at the time.
Oh, I'm sure.
And we built a little mini supercomputer out of that. But I'm like, this is so cool. I just became completely enamored with Linux and open source. And so I started following that side and went to work for a startup called Linux Care in the city. And but after that, it was like, what do you do with somebody with a science background and an interest in computers? You do high performance computing and you support scientists. I landed a job with Gary, who's on this call, at Berkeley Lab. And I started off in the Earth Sciences division. And they wanted to build some, not only to have a bunch of just Unix support but they also wanted to build some clusters. And so that's where I started. And Werewolf came shortly after that, in terms of how do I build clusters in a more sane way. And yeah, that was how I got into it. And I told you, really short story.
Yeah, that's great. Fantastic. So I will go next, just because I have an interesting one that I realized the other day. When I've been in Linux for as long as I can remember, last 6 years since Linux was free and came out. But I didn't realize until we were talking to a university the other day. I had a friend who was getting his doctorate there, and I actually helped him build a Beowulf cluster. And I just never thought about it until we were talking to them and having that conversation. And once we got it built and working, I never heard from him until he had his PhD after that. But that was my first entrance into.
You built a Beowulf.
I built a Beowulf.
What year was this?
2002.
That is awesome.
2001, 2002.
What did it do? What kind of research?
He was doing medical research. He was building what was he doing for that one? Something with pacemakers. He was actually working on the heart and was crunching data for pacemakers.
Was there any form of interconnect?
I don't remember.
Back then, it was probably Miracom was the most common one.
I just know the stuff he was struggling with were all drivers, so it was
probably Miracom
drivers. So it was fun. I remember work all day, my regular job that I get paid for, and help him overnight. It was fun.
That is so cool.
But I had not thought about that story until we were talking to those guys the other day.
So, and we were talking actually just yesterday as well about this with some other people. That pivot for me, going from science to now I'm actually supporting scientists, is actually it was a dramatic change. And it ended up powering, and I've heard Dave Godlev talk about this a little bit in the past. It ended up powering my why. Why am I doing everything that I'm doing? Why have I done this whole career path? And it really came down to, I mean, yeah, I was probably doing good things by, doing science myself. And so, but I could do much better by focusing on the operating system, focusing on the computational side, and actually supporting the scientists who are much smarter than me, and let them actually focus on the science, and then I'm able to support them. And that became a why for me for my entire career so far.
It's great. It's fun. I appreciate it. So since you mentioned Gary, we'll go to Gary next.
Yeah, we have kind of a shared beginning there, and it's just fun listening to it. But when Greg showed up, it was in around 2000. What year you started, Greg?
Yeah, 2000.
Yeah, and most of the scientists at the time were using big iron, so they were using like we had a National Computing Center at our site, and they were the outgoing system was a Cray T3E, and they had just got a IBM SP system, and it was an interesting time because the supercomputing guys looked at clusters as toys, and said, "Oh, those things are unbalanced, great on processors, no interconnects, slow storage, and on and on." And so it was an opportunity for us, because we were part of I was part of a working group where the scientists wanted to figure out like how to do HPC on a cheap. And so I ran the Unix group. And at the end of the working group, which actually lasted for over a year, we were given a mission to build 10 clusters. And so that's where, Greg and I kind of really kicked off the cluster computing at Berkeley Laboratory. So those are fun times. And just because there weren't very many tools there, I remember he and I going to a Linux users group meeting in San Francisco at the Empress of China. And just to give you an idea how early this is, the speaker was this guy named Peter Brahms, and he's talking about this intergalactic file system that he hoped to get funded, and, which later became Lustre. So I was like, hey, that looks pretty cool, that file system. But those are early days. We had a lot of fun. I was with Greg when we thought of the idea, and he did it, but the idea of doing CentOS came up down in downtown Berkeley at Jupiter Restaurant in the back. We're like, this is ridiculous. How can these guys be charging for open source software? Like, and so lots of fun back then.
Thank you, Gary. So I think Rose has a little bit of a different path into HPC. So Rose, tell us how you got involved in HPC.
Well, I was just living my life, minding my own business. And Greg called me up and said, right? I mean, the last time I saw a command line was in 5th grade when they were, everybody got computers and we all sat at this giant computer, and there was like the little green command line, and I think it was called DOS. Flash forward many years. Yeah. Flash forward many years, never really thought about it. Greg calls me up and says, we're going to do some really cool things, Rose. I want you to be a part of it. Go learn Linux. I'm like, what? What is that? What are you even talking about? And so what I found out after jumping in and meeting all of you and working with all of you is, wow, this is just kind of like how it happens. I think that there is some consistency in people's stories when they talk about how they got into HPC, because it's like, I don't know, man, I was just living my life, and then boom, and I went in that direction. All of a sudden I'm over here. And so that energy, though, that mentality of like jump in with both feet, like let's do something new, let's do something cool, let's make things happen. Like, Greg, that was such a cool story that you just shared about, no, I want this, and this is what I'm going to have. And so I'm going to go in this direction, and I'm going to bug whoever I need to bug to get where I need to go. And just, it's interesting because there's a confidence, but there's also just a passion and a desire to know and to learn and to understand and to be helpful. And that is what I have found with you guys. And I was telling my brother this the other day. I'm like, man, in my mind, I flash back to myself in 5th grade sitting at that computer. I'm like, if I'd have known how amazing all of you are that are in the HPC world. I'd have told myself back then, like, follow this, go in this direction. I mean, I know I had my own path, but it's really cool and really inspiring to see all the incredible work that you guys are doing, and anything that I can do to help with that. I'm like so grateful to be here.
It's fantastic, Rose. We appreciate you being here too. Been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we should go to the other part of the middle row and save the actual scientists for the end. Not actual scientists. I'm not nothing against you guys. I just know that they started their life as scientists. So Forrest, not computer science, science.
Well, in my case, computer science.
I know, that's what I'm saying. The middle row is kind of like the computer science row.
Yeah. Yeah. So my story of getting into HPC is kind of intertwined with my story of getting into computing in general. Essentially, I've always kind of been interested in, technology, computers, stuff like that. I was born into kind of the digital generation. So I was kind of, born into the tech, molded by it, you could say. My first experience with computing in general was in like 2011, 2012, 2013 or so. At the time, you could run Minecraft servers, that type of thing, all in the cloud. And so I was running, for me and my friends, this cloud-based Minecraft server, doing all this stuff, managing backups, different, images for different mod configurations, this type of thing, resource configurations for the node it was running on, that type of stuff. I got really interested in tech. And from there, I had a few other kind of interesting formative experiences. I was kind of really early in on tinkering around with, I don't know if anyone remembers like Cleverbot, that AI thing from the early 2010s. I tinkered around with that. I had someone who kind of introduced me to Bitcoin and Raspberry Pis and stuff like that around the same time. So I've been interested in computing for a long time. I tinkered with VMs in high school, all that kind of thing. Kind of in the provenance of what I was doing in high school, which was being the manager of this kind of portable trailer that had a whole bunch of printers, the standard printer tech entry into IT. We'd haul this trailer out to like the middle of nowhere, and we'd do all the printing for the Forest Service on wildland fire base camps. So we'd print out like the information packets, the big old huge maps on plotters, that type of thing. While I was out doing that, I got the chance to interact with a lot of their IT people, and kind of got to see like the servers and stuff like that, the hardware, the setups that they would bring to these really remote sites to kind of run the computers for the camp. That got me even more interested in kind of the IT side of things. And somewhere around that same time, senior year of high school, I heard about the San Diego Supercomputing Center. Now, I had no idea what a supercomputer was. I had no idea what the San Diego Supercomputing Center was, but I was like, oh, wow, that sounds fun. So I was starting in college at that time, and I kind of made it my goal, well, while I'm here, I want to investigate two things, working on supercomputers and being an orientation leader. Shortly after I did the orientation leader stuff, I found out through a research project that was there. This was about 2 years into college. I'd kind of bounced around in majors a little bit. Ultimately, it kind of settled around this point on computer science. But as I mentioned, I've always kind of had an interest in systems and stuff like that. So I was trying to kind of, explore different options that were not directly related to software development, but was just kind of seeing, what else you could do with CS. So around that time, I ended up involved with a research project that company Micron, one of the big semiconductor manufacturers, and a research lab on campus were doing. It was, had to do with basically using DNA as computer memory. Well, as a part of this, they asked me kind of randomly one day, oh, do you want an account on the university supercomputer? And I was like, the university supercomputer? What? I had no idea that universities had supercomputers up to that point. I just hadn't looked, I had the goal of being in supercomputing, but it hadn't quite found me yet. So I was like, oh, absolutely, sign me up. Yeah, I want on the supercomputer. So I kind of started poking around there, seeing what I could do. About a week or so after I got my account on it, I was kind of bored at my office assistant job that I was doing at the time. And I was kind of like, okay, well, there's a supercomputing center on campus. What can we do to get in on that? So on a whim, I wrote up an email and just asked, hey, I'm to their just, research computing email. I pinged them and said, hey, I'm a student. I'm really interested in supercomputing. I'm curious if you have any positions for students available. And just like a couple minutes later, I got a ping back that said, oh, fantastic timing. Our prior student just left, or one of our prior students just left. Here's the job posting for it. And so recent to my email had the job posting been put up that it still said posted a few seconds ago on it. So just like the same time they posted this job was almost the exact same time that I pinged them, hey, do you have any positions for students? So they were very excited to send me the link to that. I was a little bit apprehensive about applying for it because they wanted like C experience, Fortran experience. You know, they mentioned MPI and they're posting different stuff like this. And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. Someone encouraged me, you know, call them up, ask them, you know, exactly what level of, you know, experience they want there. So I called up the office. I didn't reach them at the time, but I just left them a message saying, hey, you know, this is Forrest. We've communicated over email. You know, I'll be on level. I don't know a ton about these requirements. I'm interested in what level of on-the-job training you're willing to provide. The response back was, absolutely. We're, you know, expecting to have to train someone up from nothing. I ended up interviewing. I parlayed the Linux systems class and stuff that I was taking the next semester into kind of, I'm going to be learning about this stuff soon, and ended up getting the job. So I was the student HPC sysadmin there on like R2 and Bora at Boise State for about 2.5 years. Did all kinds of stuff with the Idaho National Lab, et cetera, et cetera. It was a blast. For a long time, it was just me and the chief sysadmin working on things. So I got to do a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't expect the student sysadmin to get to do normally. Eventually, you know, got to see like INL's data centers, all kinds of stuff like that. It was an absolute blast. I was interested in continuing with HPC after college. I kind of applied around at a few different places, got to the end of a couple interviewing processes, that type of thing. A few weeks, but nothing that kind of hit. A couple weeks after graduation, I got a LinkedIn recruiter ping from Greg saying, hey, I have a startup called CIQ that I'm building, or Control IQ at the time, that I'm building. We're looking to hire basically a research computing professional. I'd be interested in seeing if you would like to apply. So I went ahead and did a couple interviews with CIQ. Greg showed me through like Fuzzball and some of our systems like that, and I was instantly hooked. I was like, this is the same type of thing that I had researchers asking me for at Boise State. This is the exact type of cutting edge HPC tech that I want to be working on. So I was very thrilled to have that all happen shortly after I got my job at CIQ. And I've been here for, as mentioned, a little under 2 years. So that's a little bit long-winded, but how I ended up here at HPC.
It's great, Forrest. Thank you. Do you think that's a common problem, though? People don't know that the universities have HPC environments? Because I certainly didn't know.
Yeah, actually, you know, Gary and I have heard this a number of times, I think, from UC Berkeley, as well as even some lab people. There was one point in which I was talking with some laboratory scientists who are running their Python code, their scientific code, their Python code on their Macs or whatever laptop it was, and they don't like even shutting it down when they go home. I met one person who leaves the Mac open so it doesn't go to sleep, running the job, and takes it home, like walks to the car with it open, puts it on the seat next to them, and then drives home, and then plugs it back in before the battery dies so the computation can continue. And when I met the scientist, I'm like, you know, we've got an HPC system. You could just run it on. And yeah, it was. So yeah, a lot of scientists don't know. At Berkeley Lab, we spend a lot of time reaching out to people. I remember at some point we even had in the cafeteria at the lab tents, you know, the little tabletop tents, advertising that we have an HPC system at the lab. Contact us.
Do you think part of those people don't even know what HPC is? Like they don't even know that they should be using it?
There's probably a good chunk of that. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Brian, how did you get into HPC?
So I got into HPC, I guess after my junior year of college. So in my program, I studied computer engineering, and between our junior and senior year, we had the option of taking 12 to 16 months off to do an internship. So at the time, I thought I was going to be a software developer, and I did a bunch of those interviews, and then I realized I really sucked at coding. So I found this one, and at the time I was studying computer engineering and minoring in bioengineering. So my ideal outcome would have been like something tech and healthcare related. I found this job on a job board for an HPC admin role at a children's hospital. I didn't at the time. I didn't know what HPC was. Just ended up applying for it and got the interview. And interviewed for that role and ended up getting that role. And that's where I learned all of the basics of HPC and supporting and in that specific role, I supported genomics and medical imaging labs. And then when I went back for my senior year, all my friends who were software developers, we took a distributed systems class, and my friends who had software developer roles during their internship, they needed my help on some of the assignments that we were working on. So that's when I kind of realized oh, maybe I finally know something that the other kids don't know. And I've kind of just ran with that ever since. And I've spent the last 9 years of my career kind of in HPC.
Oh, that's really cool, Brian. Thank you. John, how did you get into HPC?
It weirdly parallels what Greg went through, and even right down to the time frame. I was a biology student. I finished my master's degree, and by the end of my master's degree, realized I really suck at wet lab work and field work, and I better find a different way to be a biologist. So I started working on a PhD in computational biology. About midway through that, I got drafted to be the sysadmin for the biology department I was in. And then later, while I was doing that, I got money from a faculty member to build a small cluster that she was going to run PALP on. And I can't remember what PALP stands for, but it was one of the first, it was a phylogenetics application that they happened to release a Linux version for. And I convinced her that she could run it faster than doing the thing you guys just described of running it on the Mac and never shutting the Mac down. So I built this little 4-node AMD cluster out of basically desktop systems. She was running PALP on it, but then a friend of mine was doing his graduate work. He had a model he was running for his graduate work, and he was running it in the Sun lab, the very expensive Sun lab that another department had. And it was taking him forever to finish his computation. So he found out I had this little cluster of AMD machines and asked if he could run his model on it. And I let him run it. And so one afternoon, I got him on the system, showed him how to log in, run jobs and everything. We compiled his code, got it all working and started. And he went home thinking nothing about it. We show up the next day. He shows up and said, okay, all that stuff finished last night. These things are like 10 times faster than the Sun machines I'm working on. Can I keep using them? And he went upstairs to tell the Sun people that he was going to move all of his work down to these 4 AMD machines. And the Sun admin said, that's impossible, that those crappy AMD machines are faster than my Sun machines. And when he told me that story, I was immediately hooked, because that played right into my anti-capitalist agenda that I've had my entire life. And I was going to take down Sun with cheap desktop machines, building Beowulfs in the corner of the lab. And so, yeah, that's what kicked it off everything since then.
Yeah, I've noticed Solaris admins didn't like being told their stuff was slow. Run across that before.
No, it upsets them.
Very much so.
And you probably didn't realize it at the time, but the way to get rid of Sun was just to wait.
Yeah. You can view it as you just need to wait, or I can say I won.
Yeah,
that too. Yeah. My favorite is one of my Solaris admins used to always tell me that Linux was cute. It's like, oh, that's cute.
Oh, we in Berkeley, you might imagine there was a number of FreeBSD developers.
Oh, I can imagine.
Who thought of Linux as the toy, the kid operating system. And yeah, I think you said earlier, like, isn't that cute? Like, yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Dr. Godlove. I know you love when I play that, so I have to.
Yeah, he always cracks me up when you whip out the doctor and say, Dr.
I have to.
Godlove.
It's fun.
All right. Well, I think that I have a theme in my career that basically when I get good at something, it's time for me to like leave that career path and go do something that I'm bad at. And so that's a theme that has kind of been throughout my career path. So
the
I
only
guess
thing going through Dave now, what's going through my head is as you get good at something at CIQ, man, I got to pivot you right away over to
fails.
Yeah, I still suck at my job right now, so I'm good for now.
I don't agree, but I will agree for the point of this conversation. Yes, Dave.
Yeah.
HR,
so I won't go all the way back to like, I've done a lot of different jobs, but I think that my path toward HPC kind of begins as an undergrad. So as an undergrad, so I was, for reasons, I was really interested in neuroscience. And so and the place I was, going to school at, Radford University, didn't have a neuroscience major. So I was basically a psychology major with almost, but not quite, a minor in biology. I was kind of like putting stuff together to try to make my own neuroscience course. And I was working in a lab on campus, doing like all kinds of like wet lab stuff. I was doing like a lot of pipetting and histology and cell counting and staining stuff and some animal behavioral work and all kinds of stuff like that. Almost no computer science. And so then it got time for me to graduate and go to grad school. And so I applied and, went to a few different places, and everywhere that I went, people were like, well, do you know how to program? And I was like, I mean, I'm a neuroscience person. Why do I need to know how to program? And everybody was like, yeah, you got to be able to program to analyze data. And almost everybody used MATLAB. And so I dove in and took some like crash course MATLAB stuff and figured out how to, start programming in MATLAB. And I figured out I had a knack for it and got pretty good at it. So in grad school, I did a lot of programming in MATLAB. Now, MATLAB is kind of funny because it's this programming language in which you learn like all this programming and all this computer science and all this stuff, but it's all within like the confines of this one thing, MATLAB. And most of the skills that you learn are not transferable to like, so you don't like learn MATLAB and then you know how to do Python, or, you know how to do like, something else. Like you learn MATLAB and you know how to do MATLAB, and that's it. The skills don't really transfer that well. So I got into, I went through my undergraduate or my graduate school career rather with MATLAB, and then I got into a postdoc at the NIH. And up to this point, I hadn't really used high performance computing. The lab that I was in grad school, I had some lab mates that were using HPC at Vanderbilt, but I always kind of like dogged them and sort of laughed that like, I was able to optimize my code to the point where I could run it on my desktop, whereas they had to like use this supercomputer to get their work done instead. But when I got to the NIH, I actually, I started doing experiments where we were gathering, we might gather like 30 or 40 gigabytes of data within a single experiment within a single day. And it was my job to take all this data and do signal processing on it to pull stuff out of it. And I didn't, I just couldn't do that anymore on a desktop computer. So I started to use BioWolf while I was at the NIH, which is the big intramural cluster there. And it was really, really awesome. I loved it. The whole idea of, like using the supercomputer, and, I started doing stuff where it was like, I would do the calculation. I would figure out, if I do this on my machine here in my office, it's going to take me like a year and a half, from start to finish to get all this stuff done. And I can do it overnight, on the cluster. It was like amazing. And so I'm like showing all my lab mates who aren't using the cluster, and I'm like bringing them on and, giving them some helper scripts and stuff and showing them how to do it, and just got really, really interested in it. It was my first experience with Linux. I installed a Linux box at home. I installed a bunch of lab computers with Linux and started using it a lot. And from there, so I was a postdoc, and it was like, okay, what's my next career step? Either it's to become a PI and start running my own lab, or it's to become a staff scientist. And the PI thing, I didn't really like a whole lot the idea of, because to me, that was like, I was going to be doing all the work that I didn't care for, like writing grants, writing papers, and directing other people to do the work that I actually thought was fun, which was, writing code and collecting data and doing all that stuff. Staff scientists would have been a little bit better, but it was suffering from that problem of like, I was getting kind of good at my job. And if I just continued to go to as a staff scientist, I'd continue to be good at this job. And, why not change to something I was not good at? So I was looking for something else. And the NIH BioWolf cluster, they were hiring people and they had some positions posted. And one of those was for a staff scientist to kind of sit in between the scientists who were using the computer and the supercomputer itself, and kind of help people to use it. And, it's just like Forrest, they had this job listed and they had all these requirements and stuff. And it was like, I don't know any of that stuff, So I went to the interview, and, they're going through, and I'm like, well, I mean, I have Linux installed on a box at home, and I administer it there. I mean, like, but I was like, but I know MATLAB. And they were like, oh, we don't have anybody on staff who knows MATLAB. And we get a lot of questions from people using MATLAB that we don't know how to answer. And so I became kind of the MATLAB person on staff. And one of my buddies from grad school actually joked with me. He was like, you found like the one MATLAB job that was out there. And so from there, I became the MATLAB guy. I administered MATLAB for a while. I wrote some hacky programs to allow people to better use like the MATLAB compiler, and, wrote some stuff to better manage the licenses and just a bunch of stuff like that. And then this thing called Linux containers came along. And some of the scientists asked us to install Singularity on the cluster. And it fell to me just because they were neuroscientists that wanted this software. And so I had the neuroscience background. I was talking with these folks. I got the issue. I started to investigate Singularity. And so then I became the MATLAB guy and the container guy. And that's pretty much how I got into it.
Yeah, and now your name is all over the documentation for Singularity and Aptainer. It's everywhere. Thank you, Dave. I can't read it.
What are the various types of HPCs? Depending on various technology and deployment models. Am I missing? What are the? Sorry, it's again. Nobody knows on this side.
The answer is yes.
We're looking at is actually far away. So we're both. Yeah, I'm nearsighted. So.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
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 There are lots of types of HPCs. Yes. I'm not sure we can go into that, but maybe that's a good topic for another.
One big difference. One big difference. One big difference I didn't appreciate until recently. I mean, I appreciated it, but I think the terminology I've recently heard is HPC, that is high performance computing, versus HTC, high throughput computing. And so that's a big way that you can sort of bifurcate the two and split them up. Basically, just like, does your application depend on, running one application across multiple different nodes, or is it embarrassingly parallel where you're just, you've got 1,000 files that you have to run some analysis on, so you just do it on 1,000 different computers.
Thanks, Dave, for fielding that one. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and then of course you can differentiate further after that, but that's I think one big place where it bifurcates.
Good, thank you. Alan, I saw you posting there Gopher, and that kind of made me laugh when you have Forrest talking about his foray into supercomputing is in the cloud. So that made me chuckle. Yeah. Tell us about your story. How did you get involved in HPC?
Well, I fortunately, thank you, had opportunities in previous podcasts to videocasts to talk about some of this. I guess the thing I want to say here is I probably had about a dozen different how I got started in computing stories before I ever encountered anything like HPC. Probably my first scientific programming class was in 1974, folks. So as a 18-year-old at Lewis and Clark College, where we would go into the basement of the oldest building on campus and use an IBM computer that's day job was to run the payroll, and then night we got to do scientific programming on it, and a card reader and a pen plotter and stuff. And I could probably tell a dozen such stories. One involving a Data General Nova with 4K of ferrite core memory that I found in the corner of a lab, and that's probably the oldest computer that we've gotten a scientific publication out of. That one requires a beer, that story. But probably ran on 2 different cluster environments, a VAX cluster and an alpha cluster, before one day, and I have told the story on this webinar series, encountering a friend who said, we built a Linux cluster, and I asked, why did you do that? And that was kind of the first time I veered into this. So I had sort of gone through the tenure track career path here, assistant professor, associate professor. All of these stories are unified by the fact that I was always just using the computer to do science. One science or another. It just happened to be that I could get that computer, that science through the computers. And when we finally did the stuff that I've talked about before, where we turned these Beowulf clusters of Linux machines into a worldwide resource and used it to find the top quark, that probably started my path into full-time computing. I became a research professor. I was spending all my time on funded research, and the university had a project with state funding and a deadline to demonstrate the value of grid computing for things of economic value to the state. And they didn't have anyone to run the project. They made me a very nice offer, and I realized I didn't have to write research grants to fund my summer salary anymore. So that's what finally tipped me over. And we ran those projects for a while. And then basically what happened was the guy who ran the high performance computing center here retired, and his successor ended up having health problems, and I stepped into the breach. So it was a very accidental path into HPC. And basically at that point, it was through the management track. So the interesting thing about this, and maybe inspiring for some of your listeners, is that I never learned MPI programming or the classic things that you have to learn to become an HPC expert, except as necessary to do the jobs. And it's still the case that every time I turn around, I'm learning something new. But fortunately or unfortunately, expertise in this field has a very short shelf life. If you're an expert in something, 3 years later, that thing is going to be obsolete, right? So you might as well start learning now about the next thing that's coming. And that goes back to the question that was asked earlier: what kinds of HPC are there? And my answer was yes. Well, I think that's really a valid answer. That it's limited by your imagination and the evolution of technology, and it is still a really fun time to be doing this.
That's very true. Thank you, Alan.
And knowing that it's always changing means that Dave Godlove will always have things to learn.
It's true.
And we'll always keep him engaged.
I'll just keep sucking. I'll just keep sucking at what I'm doing forever.
That's not at all what I was saying.
John, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have a kind of a lead up to a question. I was thinking as Alan was talking about, we've on previous of these, we've shared old man stories or old admin stories, I guess. And I was thinking about all the painful things that I went through that have scarred me, that led me to a lot of the beliefs and views that I hold now. And just to pick one at random, my very first cluster I provisioned by setting up one machine and then using DD and swapping drives out one at a time to DD that image onto the other drives to carry them to the machines. So I can look back, and the reason I went through that and NFS root and any other horrible ideas for provisioning a machine, the reason I went through that was because I had to struggle because there wasn't any documentation. Like there was no place for me to go to find out how to do this right. you know? And so what I'm wondering is, looking back at all the scars I've accumulated, for the younger people in this, if they look at what they're doing today, what do you think is going to be a scar when you look back in 30 years?
Brian, Forrest?
Yeah, my advisor used to say that you spend all of your career spent checking the things that went wrong in your thesis experiment.
Wow, Brian and Forrest are being
Somehow
quiet
those
now.
scars persist.
So I think what you're asking is, Brian and Forrest, what are we doing now to scar you?
Yeah. Forrest just can't even.
I'm not sure I have an answer for that one at the moment. Maybe in a few years, once this is all settled. But
you could turn that into a ringtone, Brian.
Forrest pled the fifth.
He did.
I mean, for
Jonathan?
me, I imagine a future where HPC workflows just work and there won't be back and forth with the users and just trying to get their workflows up and running. And I imagine, just user submits their job and it just runs. I think.
So, Brian, you're on to what I was hoping you guys would say, which is the Beowulf. I mean, we've been using the Beowulf for the last, almost 30 years now. All right. Is it possible we can do better?
I think so.
Is it possible that scientists don't need to know SSH, how to compile their code, how to optimize and profile their code, copying and management of the data, understanding how the scheduling queue works for every single system that they have access to, and everyone being potentially different, which is usually the case, running the job, and then having to copy all the data off. I mean, couldn't we optimize that somehow?
Probably. I think there's probably a good way to do that.
Yeah. It's a little fuzzy though. I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah. So I'm a big skeptic and critic of the so-called AI technologies that we have, which are basically exercised in predictive statistics, right? The most likely thing to come next is X. And then a bunch of sentences of X and get put together, and people say, "Oh, isn't it amazing how much the computer has learned?" No, it's just predicting patterns of text based on other patterns of text that it's seen. However, Greg, this is exactly relevant to the problem you described. We can, I think, and should be teaching AI to predict the next right thing where it's possible for the next right thing to be predicted. This has actually been my design criterion for a software for decades. The computer should do the right thing by default where it's possible to know ahead of time what the right thing is. And so I actually think, at the risk of losing my skeptic hat, that the chat GPT-like technologies have applicability in systems programming, in taking the rough edges out of these gotchas where the user experience is, I didn't type that obscure command exactly right. Well, we can teach the machine what you meant. So maybe I need to become more of a skeptic, but I actually think we can use these technologies to do API programming and stuff like that.
I don't know if I thought about it quite in that way. It's pretty deep. Thank you, Alan.
Chat GPT as a shell prompt would be fantastic. That's some significant portion of my life has been spent backspacing over mistyped commands, which should have been trivial to figure out.
I actually think that there is a shell that is now based on, I can't remember what it is, but I've seen it. There is a AI powered shell.
Yeah, it was open source in C. You can go download it and put your credentials in.
Yeah.
There, John.
So I think this is not as crazy as it sounds. It probably will become valuable quicker than the rest of that crap that's out there.
Did he really put that up there?
Forrest? Okay, I wish we could share the internal thread of what everybody says. So Forrest, I'm going to call you out on this one.
Thank goodness,
because you didn't speak before when we asked about the pain points. Chat GPT plus Emacs when?
It's got to be coming. If there's already an AI powered shell, someone's building a plugin. It's inevitable.
Jonathan's already posting it. Oh, man. Just sounds
I just hope that the plugin was written by ChatGPT.
Do you think AI is going to be smart enough to just tell you shouldn't be using Emacs?
Actually, that's the next question I'm going to ask ChatGPT. Pirates or ninjas, and Vim versus Emacs.
It's a good one.
Yeah,
it's a good one. So now we also have Glenn in here. Do we want to quickly?
Is Glenn on?
Quickly?
Glenn,
Glenn's
are you there?
Still, maybe.
I don't know why my camera's not working, but yeah, quickly. So, Glenn Otero, Director of Scientific Computing at CIQ, and I have a similar biological path to HPC. When I was a postdoc working on HIV molecular biology and thinking about my next steps, I was not really enthralled with academia anymore. So I struck out, actually was interested in trying to build computational models of the immune system responses to things like HIV, work that Alan Perlson at Los Alamos had pioneered. Ended up working with Alan probably about 30 years later, but my next step was San Diego Supercomputer Center, and it was kind of downhill from there. So that's where I kind of picked up Linux, and I was actually first working on Sun machines there. Got access to some of the clusters and supercomputers at SDSC, and then I started wanting to spread this information to bioinformaticians everywhere. So I went back and forth consulting and working for different companies, whether it was Double Twist or my own company, where we created like a BioBrew bioinformatician role for the ROCS provisioning tool back in the day, and worked for some others, worked for Dell as a life sciences expert when it came to HPC, helping their customers pick the right parts for the cluster. I designed the first one-stop cluster shop at Dell with the genomic solution there. And then I moved on to TGen. I was a scientific director there, helping them bring new technologies like GPUs and compressed technologies for life sciences data. And then I moved to CIQ, and here I am.
Thank you, Glenn. And to answer your question, Rose, if it doesn't say over, it's wrong. Are you okay? Just making sure. All right. Well, I think we're gonna have to wrap up. We've been about an hour. It's been fantastic. It's fun doing this in person for a change, and I really appreciate everybody joining us. I like this format.
I do too.
It's fun.
I do too. I think we should just bring you over to Reno every week.
Every week? That might not be feasible. Be fun to get people rolling through here, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love that.
We're building a nice little podcast webinar room, and we can completely Joe Rogan it.
That'd be
awesome.
That would be awesome.
Joe Rogan for HPC.
It's very cool.
Woo, woo.
Well, thank you very much for joining, panel. Thank you for joining us and telling your stories. We really appreciate it. If you guys would go like and subscribe, we would really appreciate it. So thank you very much. It's good to see you, and see you again next week.
Bye.